What if I told you that one of the most shocking conversations in Christian television history was secretly recorded? What if I told you that a famous marriage expert told a son he couldn't hear from God directly, but had to listen to his mother instead? And what if I told you that this mother claimed to speak for God himself? Well, buckle up, because today we're diving into one of the most disturbing stories to ever come out of Christian broadcasting. And trust me, you're not going to believe what you're about to hear. This is a story about power, control, and spiritual abuse at one of America's biggest Christian TV networks. It's a story about a family torn apart, a mother who claimed to be God's voice on earth, and a marriage counselor who backed her up. By the time we're done today, you'll understand why this scandal has rocked the Christian community to its core. Let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're sitting in a meeting room, and someone you trust tells you that you can't hear God's voice for yourself. Instead, they say you have to listen to another person because that person speaks for God. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to Jonathan Lamb, the former vice president of Daystar Television Network, one of the biggest Christian TV stations in America. This story begins with a family that looked perfect from the outside. Jonathan Lamb worked alongside his mother, Joni Lamb, who was the president of Daystar after her husband Marcus died. For years, they built this massive Christian television empire together. But behind the scenes, something very dark was happening. Jonathan and his wife Susie claimed they were being bullied and spiritually abused by Joni and her friends. But the breaking point came during one particular meeting that was so shocking, so unbelievable, that Jonathan and Susie decided to secretly record it. What they captured on that recording would change everything. On July 11th, 2023, Joni called a surprise meeting. She brought in Jimmy Evans, a well-known marriage expert who has written books and appears on TV talking about relationships. Jonathan and Susie thought they were just having a normal family discussion. They had no idea they were walking into what would become one of the most disturbing conversations ever recorded in Christian television. Now, before we go further, you need to understand what led up to this moment. This wasn't just about work disagreements or family drama. This was much deeper and much more serious. 2 years earlier, something terrible had happened in the Lamb family. Jonathan had witnessed a family member doing something inappropriate with his young daughter. As any father would do, Jonathan immediately spoke up to protect his child. He told his parents, Marcus and Joni, what he had seen. But instead of supporting Jonathan and protecting their granddaughter, Marcus and Joni did something that would haunt this family forever. They defended the family member. They said he was innocent. They basically told Jonathan that he was wrong about what he had seen with his own eyes. Can you imagine how that must have felt? You witness someone hurting your child, and your own parents don't believe you. They don't support you. Instead, they defend the person who hurt your daughter. This created a huge rift in the family that would never fully heal. Marcus told Jonathan that they had done an internal investigation and cleared the family member. But here's the thing that makes this even worse. After Marcus died in November 2021, Jonathan and Susie learned that this so-called investigation was completely flawed. It wasn't real. It wasn't thorough. It was just a way to sweep everything under the rug. So by the time we get to July 2023, Jonathan and Susie are already dealing with the trauma of not being believed about their daughter's abuse. They're already feeling isolated and hurt by Joni's lack of support. And then Joni does something that makes everything even worse. Just 2 months after Marcus died, Joni started a relationship with Doug Weiss, a sex therapist who appears on TV. This might sound normal, but here's where it gets complicated. Doug was married to another woman for 30 years when he filed for divorce just to be with Joni. And according to Jonathan and Susie, Doug didn't have biblical ground for divorce. Now, you might think this is just about family disapproval of a new relationship. But remember, this is a Christian television network. These people preach about biblical marriage and family values to millions of viewers every day. So when the president of the network marries someone who many believe got divorced without biblical justification, it creates a huge problem. Jonathan, Susie, and other family members felt like Joni was being a hypocrite. They believed she was committing adultery by marrying Doug. But instead of listening to her family's concerns, Joni did something that would shock everyone. She married Doug Weiss on June 10th, 2023, despite her entire family being against it. Not one of her children supported this marriage. They all tried to talk her out of it, but she wouldn't listen. A longtime family friend named Denise Boggs was so concerned that she wrote a passionate letter to the family just 2 months before the wedding. Denise had actually provided marriage counseling to Doug and his previous wife, so she knew him personally. In her letter, she begged the family to intervene. She called Doug a wolf in sheep's clothing and said he was deceiving Joni. Denise wrote that she had tried to share her concerns with Joni directly, but Joni refused to listen. She said Doug was unfit for such a prominent role in Christian television, and that his presence was mocking the sacred bond of marriage. When Jonathan received this letter, he gathered his family to talk to Joni about their concerns. But Joni barely gave anyone a chance to speak. She gave each person exactly 60 seconds to express their feelings, then said all she saw from them was fear, and rushed out the door to catch Doug's flight to New York. Can you imagine how dismissive and hurtful that must have been? Your family is trying to express serious concerns about your life decisions, and you give them 1 minute each and then run away? This shows how unwilling Joni was to listen to anyone who disagreed with her. After Joni married Doug, things got even worse for Jonathan and Susie. On July 5th, 2023, they were asked to read a comment from a viewer on the air that praised Joni's marriage to Doug. Even though Jonathan and Susie were still deeply uncomfortable with the marriage, they were being pressured to publicly endorse it by reading this viewer comment. Jonathan and Susie refused to read the comment because they felt it would be lying. They felt it would make them look like they supported a marriage they believed was wrong. This made Joni very angry, and it set up the confrontation that would happen 6 days later. So now we come to that infamous meeting on July 11th, 2023. Joni calls Jonathan and Susie into a room with Jimmy Evans. Remember, Jonathan and Susie have no idea what's about to happen. They think this might be a normal family meeting, or maybe some kind of mediation. But what happens next is so shocking that it's hard to believe it actually occurred. Jimmy Evans, this man who is supposed to be a marriage expert and a man of God, looks at Jonathan and tells him something that goes against everything Christianity teaches about having a personal relationship with God. Evans tells Jonathan that he has to submit to his mother because she speaks for God. Let me say that again. Evans tells a grown man that he cannot hear from God directly, but instead must listen to his mother because she is God's voice. Jonathan, probably confused and hurt, asks Evans a reasonable question. He says, "So I can't hear from God? I have to hear from her?" And Evans confirms his twisted theology by saying what she says is God. Think about how insane this is. Christianity teaches that every believer can have a direct relationship with God. The whole point of Jesus' sacrifice was to tear down the barrier between God and people, so that everyone could approach God directly. But here's Jimmy Evans, a supposed Christian teacher, telling Jonathan that he has to go through his mother to hear from God. But it gets even worse. When Jonathan asks what happens outside of Daystar, Evans doubles down. He says, what she says is God, and Daystar is the voice of God. This means that according to Evans, Joni Lamb isn't just speaking for God at work. She is the voice of God everywhere. This is a kind of spiritual abuse that destroys people's faith and tears families apart. Jonathan is being told that his own relationship with God doesn't matter. His prayers don't matter. His faith doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is what his mother says, because she supposedly speaks for God. Now, during this meeting, something happens that shows just how manipulative and cruel this whole situation had become. Joni looks at her son and says something so hurtful that it's shocking she would say it to anyone, let alone her own child. She tells Jonathan that his wife Susie has him by the balls. Can you believe that? A mother saying that about her daughter-in-law in front of a marriage counselor? This isn't just disrespectful. It's deliberately cruel and designed to humiliate both Jonathan and Susie. But Joni wasn't done. She goes on to defend her control over Jonathan and Susie by claiming she has more ministry experience than they do. She tells Jonathan that compared to the rest of them in the meeting, his experience is roughly a thumbnail. She's basically saying he's too inexperienced and stupid to make his own decisions. Jimmy Evans backs her up by pointing to his 41 years as a pastor and his experience working with couples. He tells Jonathan, It's a spirit that you won't listen to authority and to experience. So now Jonathan is being told that if he doesn't submit to his mother's control, he has an evil spirit. This is textbook spiritual abuse. They're using their claimed authority and experience to shut down any disagreement or independent thinking. They're saying that questioning them is the same as questioning God himself. Jonathan tries to push back by asking who Joni is accountable to. After all, if she speaks for God, who keeps her in check? Evans claims he's on the board of directors, but Jonathan points out that the board only consists of 3 people: Jonathan, Joni, and Tom Callender, who is Joni's longtime friend and lawyer. So basically, Joni has surrounded herself with people who will never challenge her. There's no real accountability. She can claim to speak for God, and there's nobody with the authority to tell her she's wrong. When Jonathan continues to question this setup, Evans pulls out a Bible verse that spiritual abusers love to use. He quotes Romans 13, which talks about submitting to authority, because all authority comes from God. But Evans twists this verse to mean that Jonathan has to submit to whatever his mother says, no matter what. This is a classic manipulation tactic. Abusive leaders love to quote Romans 13 to shut down any questions or disagreements. They act like questioning them is the same as questioning God. But that's not what the Bible teaches at all. Then Joni delivers what might be the most shocking statement of the entire meeting. She tells Jonathan that his refusal to submit to her will bring a curse on him and his children. She actually threatens her own son and grandchildren with divine punishment because he won't obey her every command. Let that sink in for a moment. A grandmother is threatening to curse her own grandchildren because their father won't submit to her control. This is so far beyond normal family dysfunction that it's hard to even comprehend. But Joni still wasn't finished with her spiritual manipulation. She brings up the 2021 abuse allegations involving Jonathan's daughter. Remember, this is a situation where Jonathan tried to protect his child, and his parents didn't believe him. Joni uses this traumatic situation to attack Susie, claiming that Susie's emotional response to the abuse shows that her thinking is erratic. She basically says that because Susie was upset about someone hurting her daughter, she can't be trusted to think clearly about anything. This is incredibly cruel and manipulative. Joni is using her granddaughter's abuse as a weapon against her daughter-in-law. She's saying that Susie's natural maternal instincts to protect her child are actually evidence that she's mentally unstable. The meeting reaches its climax when they return to the issue of the viewer comment praising Joni's marriage. Susie explains that she can't read something she doesn't believe because that would be lying. She says, "If I'm not comfortable, then I have to stick with my convictions." This is completely reasonable. Susie is saying she won't lie or pretend to support something she believes is wrong. But Joni sees this as an act of rebellion that cannot be tolerated. Joni tells Susie that reading a viewer comment has nothing to do with her personal beliefs. She says Susie should be able to read anything a viewer says, regardless of whether she agrees with it. But Susie stands firm, saying that if she says something she doesn't believe, it's a lie. This is when Joni drops the hammer. She looks at Susie and says, "If you can't read a positive thing about Doug, you're fired. You're not welcome here." Just like that, Susie is fired from Daystar for refusing to lie on television. She's fired for having integrity and refusing to endorse something she believes is wrong. After Susie is fired, Jimmy Evans and Joni turn their attention to Jonathan. They want to know if he will read the comment that his wife refused to read. They want to see if he will submit to their authority or if he will stand with his wife. Joni makes it clear what she wants. She says, "All I want to hear is that you will do what I say." This isn't about the viewer comment anymore. This is about total submission and control. Jonathan initially says he would rather not read the comment, but when pressed, he admits he would probably give in to his mother's demands. This shows how effective the manipulation and pressure had become. After a long silence, Evans delivers what might be his most shocking statement of the entire meeting. He tells Jonathan, "Now you're in trouble with her," referring to Susie. Then he says something that reveals the twisted dynamic that had developed. Joni tells Susie, "You've got him by the balls, my dear. You're frightening." She's accusing Susie of controlling her husband, when in reality, Joni is the one trying to control both of them. When Susie objects to being spoken to this way, Joni doubles down. She claims that Susie gave Jonathan a look that showed she was controlling him. But Jonathan tries to defend his wife, saying they agree with each other. Joni's response is chilling. She tells Jonathan, "You're about to catch hell, so you handle her. You are her covering, handle her." She's commanding her son to control his wife and force her to submit. Then Joni makes a statement that shows how serious she considers the situation. She tells Evans, "This is going to be his Alamo," referring to the famous battle where everyone died. She's basically saying this is Jonathan's last stand, and he needs to choose between his wife and his mother. Evans backs her up by telling Jonathan that his leadership position at Daystar probably depends on how he handles his wife. So now Jonathan is being told that his job and his future depend on his ability to control Susie and force her to submit to Joni's demands. The meeting ends with Susie leaving the room and Joni delivering a final threat to Jonathan. She tells him, "You're going to pay dearly for siding with Susie." It's a clear warning that there will be consequences for not choosing his mother over his wife. After this shocking meeting, Jonathan tried to reach out to his mother through email. He explained that everything was out of control and that he felt trapped in an impossible situation. He said he never imagined he would find himself in this position and that they needed to talk immediately. But Joni's response showed that nothing had changed. She simply said that payroll wouldn't be affected at this time and that she would let him know when she was ready to discuss things again. For the next 18 months, Jonathan and Susie claimed that the bullying and threats from Daystar continued to escalate. They were living under constant pressure and fear, never knowing when the next attack would come. Finally, on November 16th, 2024, Jonathan was fired from Daystar, just like his wife had been fired more than a year earlier. The family business that had been built over decades was destroyed, and a family was torn apart by spiritual abuse and manipulation. When news of the story broke, Daystar and Joni Lamb were forced to respond. But instead of addressing the serious allegations of spiritual abuse, they went on the attack. Joni accused Jonathan of running a slander campaign against her because he wasn't chosen to be the next president of Daystar after his father died. She tried to make it sound like this was all about Jonathan being jealous and power-hungry. Joni also released part of an email from Jonathan where he had asked for a contract that would protect his position and prevent him from being fired without proper cause. She claimed this was blackmail. But when you read the email, it's clear that Jonathan was just trying to protect himself and his family from exactly what ended up happening. In the email, Jonathan explained that he wanted to move past the incident, but needed transparency about job security. He asked for a contract that would outline his future role and prevent anyone from acting in a way that would jeopardize their jobs without a valid reason and board approval. Jonathan and Susie also agreed in that email not to use or publish any audio recordings that could harm Daystar or the family. But this wasn't blackmail, as Joni claimed. It was actually a response to 13 requirements that Daystar had given them if they wanted to return to their positions. One of these requirements was that Jonathan and Susie had to agree to delete all recordings of their conversations with Jimmy Evans and Joni. Daystar knew these recordings existed, and they were afraid of what they contained. Jonathan explained that he had been discussing his father's plans for succession, not trying to replace his mother as president. These discussions had happened before they learned that the family member accused of abusing their daughter had been cleared by the flawed internal investigation. Jonathan and Susie said that once they learned the truth about the investigation, they no longer cared about their jobs. They only wanted justice for their daughter. This entire story reveals something deeply disturbing about what can happen when religious leaders abuse their authority. When someone claims to speak for God, it becomes almost impossible to question them without being accused of questioning God himself. Jimmy Evans, who built his reputation on helping marriages, participated in tearing a family apart. He told a man that he couldn't hear from God directly and had to listen to his mother instead. He supported a system where one person claimed divine authority over others. Joni Lamb, who preached about family values on television, threatened to curse her own grandchildren because their father wouldn't submit to her control. She used her daughter's abuse as a weapon against her daughter-in-law. She fired people for refusing to lie on television. This story shows how spiritual abuse works. It starts with someone claiming special authority or a special relationship with God. Then they use that claimed authority to control others. Anyone who questions them is accused of questioning God. Anyone who disobeys them is accused of having an evil spirit or being rebellious. The victims are isolated from support systems and made to feel like they're crazy or evil for having normal human reactions to abuse. They're told that their own thoughts and feelings can't be trusted, and that they must rely entirely on the abuser for guidance. In Jonathan and Susie's case, they were told they couldn't even trust their own eyes when they witnessed abuse of their daughter. They were told they couldn't trust their own consciences when asked to lie on television. They were told they couldn't trust their own relationship with God, but had to go through Joni instead. This kind of abuse destroys families, destroys faith, and destroys lives. It's particularly damaging because it uses people's faith against them. The victims want to be good Christians, so they try to submit to authority even when that authority is clearly wrong. What makes this story even more tragic is that it all could have been avoided if Joni had listened to her family's concerns about her marriage, if she had believed her son about the abuse of her granddaughter, if she had been willing to be accountable to others instead of claiming to speak for God. None of this had to happen. Instead, she chose power and control over family and truth. She chose to surround herself with people who would never challenge her, and she destroyed anyone who dared to question her decisions. The recordings that Jonathan and Susie made are proof of what really happened in that meeting. They show that this isn't just a family disagreement or a case of sour grapes from someone who didn't get promoted. This is documented evidence of spiritual abuse and manipulation. These recordings should serve as a warning to everyone about what can happen when religious leaders are given unchecked power. They show why accountability is so important in any organization, especially religious ones. They also show why we must never stop asking questions, even when those questions are uncomfortable. When someone claims to speak for God, that's exactly when we need to be most careful and most questioning. The Bible teaches that we should test every spirit and examine everything carefully. It teaches that no human being is perfect and that we all need accountability. It teaches that every believer has direct access to God through Jesus Christ. Any teaching that contradicts these basic principles should be rejected, no matter who is promoting it. Any leader who claims to be above questioning or accountability is dangerous and should not be trusted. Jonathan and Susie Lamb showed incredible courage in speaking out about their experiences. They knew they would face backlash and accusations. They knew they would lose their jobs and be cut off from their family. But they spoke out anyway because they knew the truth needed to be told. Their story is a reminder that spiritual abuse is real and that it happens in places where we might least expect it. It happens in churches, in Christian organizations, and even in Christian families. It can be perpetrated by people who seem godly and respectable from the outside, but their story is also a reminder that the truth eventually comes to light. No matter how much power someone has, no matter how much they try to silence their victims, the truth has a way of coming out. The recordings of that July 11th meeting are now public, and people can hear for themselves exactly what was said. They can make their own judgments about whether Jimmy Evans and Joni Lamb were acting in a godly manner or whether they were abusing their authority. This story should make all of us more careful about who we trust with authority in our lives. It should make us more willing to ask hard questions and demand accountability. And it should make us more compassionate toward victims of spiritual abuse, who often struggle to be believed because their abuser seems so godly and respectable. If you've been affected by spiritual abuse, know that you're not alone. Know that it's not your fault. Know that questioning abusive authority is not rebellion against God. It's faithfulness to God. God doesn't want his children to be controlled and manipulated by other people, even if those people claim to speak for him. The truth about what happened at Daystar is finally coming out, and it's shocking. But it's also liberating for anyone who has been told they can't think for themselves, can't question authority, or can't have a direct relationship with God. You can think for yourself. You can and should question authority when it's being abused. And you can have a direct, personal relationship with God that doesn't require going through any human intermediary. That's the real message of this story. Not that all religious leaders are bad, but that all human leaders are fallible and must be held accountable. Not that we shouldn't respect authority, but that we should never give any human being the kind of absolute authority that belongs only to God. Jonathan and Susie Lamb's story is tragic, but it's also important. It's a warning and a wake-up call. It's a reminder that power corrupts, even in religious settings, and that we must always be vigilant against abuse. If this story has opened your eyes to the reality of spiritual abuse, if it's helped you understand what you or someone you love might be going through, then something good has come from this terrible situation. The truth is painful, but it's also healing. And in the end, the truth always wins. What do you think about this shocking story? Have you ever experienced spiritual abuse or seen it happen to someone else? Let me know in the comments below. And if this video has been helpful to you, please give a like and share it with others who need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos, exposing the truth about what's really happening in the world of Christian media. Together, we can shine a light on abuse and help protect others from going through what Jonathan and Susie Lamb endured. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.